Welcome back. In a massive and historic move by the centre, the Jammu and Kashmir as a state lost its special status today. The provisions of Article 370, which gave special status to Jammu and Kashmir, have been revoked. As a result, 35A, which gave residents special rights over jobs and acquiring property, also ceased to exist. What this essentially means is that the Jammu and Kashmir law and order will now be under the centre's control. All laws that are applicable for the rest of India will also be applicable in Jammu and Kashmir. Those who are not residents of the region, who until now had to be permanent residents in order to apply for jobs or buy land, now anyone in the country will be able to apply for jobs or buy land in the state. It was not possible earlier because of this very special status. Now, these changes come into effect immediately and have been made via presidential order. Now, remember, Article 370 specifically had a provision saying that it needed to be approved by the Constituent Assembly. Now, given that there is no state government, there's no Constituent Assembly, and there's no approval required from the Assembly of the state, hence just a signature from the President was enough to move this through. The big questions that we're asking today is this. While the government has spoken, the Home Minister has spoken both in the lower and the upper house of Parliament today, speaking to the country and to the other members of Parliament that this move will bring in prosperity, peace, and of course, a complete sea change of life in Jammu and Kashmir. The question we're asking today is, will it hold scrutiny in the court of law? Joining us today, Rakesh Trivedi, Senior Advocate with the Supreme Court, Aishwarya Bhati, Senior Advocate with the Supreme Court as well. Manoj Joshi is a Senior Journalist, and Mr. Kailash Vasudev is a Senior Advocate with the Supreme Court. I welcome all of you to this conversation, and I thank you for your time. If I may start with Mr. Kailash Vasudev. Mr. Vasudev, good evening. There are a couple of questions we have to ask. One is, of course, the nature of the decision that was made, and the other one is perhaps the route that was taken by the central government. Now, there are several who believe that this entire thing is going to wind up in Supreme Court. Do you agree that perhaps this will become subject to scrutiny by the court at some point?
Good evening. Yes, all legislations of this kind which impact a reorganization of a state, I'm using the word very cautiously, will eventually land up in the court, and especially in an area like Jammu and Kashmir, which has been very sensitive. We must look at a bit of a background to this notification. You see, initially Jammu and Kashmir was under the rule of a Maharaja, who ceded to the Indian Union in 1947-48. When he ceded to the Indian Union, it was at a point of time when a portion of the state had been lost in conquest to our neighbor Pakistan. So in 1950, when we framed the Constitution, we decided to have a special provision in the form of a temporary provision in the articles for the state of Jammu and Kashmir, incorporating it as a Class B state in our first schedule to the Constitution. As time went, it became a part of our Constitution because Part B states were removed. It was given a special status, but what is fascinating in this whole thing is that Article 370 is asymmetrical to the by and large Constitution of our country. It's an exception in its own rights. It is an exception because powers are given to the Government of India to take drastic measures in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which is not available in the other states. The Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir, framed in 1939, adapted later on and made a part of their constitution, acknowledges this fact that the Constitution of India will remain supreme in 3 areas, but for the rest, the state's constitution will apply. So therefore, 370 carves an exception to the normal states and the configurations which apply to the first schedule to the Constitution, which incorporates the states. The powers to the President are absolute in the form that they must be given by the Government of India. So therefore, the Government of India can request the President under 370 to pass any orders he finds appropriate at a point of time when the Constitution of the state stands suspended or there is no legislative assembly. This is what has happened presently, and we are at the moment testing our Constitution in a very big way, and we are actually testing history to see how far this can be done in a state which has been done and has been a matter of grave concern to two nations and now a third nation, China, through Ladakh. So this is going to be a great situation. It's a very courageous decision by the government of India to take this position, to incorporate all the states in. But here I have a bit of a caveat. The caveat is that under the scheme of our constitution, we have the state of Jammu and Kashmir under Article 1 and 3. By the order today, we divide Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories. The union territories become Ladakh on one side, Jammu and Kashmir on its own. Ladakh will not have an assembly. The question is, can you do this? Can you reduce the status of a state from that of a state, a constituent state of India, to a union territory? This is the only gray area which troubles me. Because if you have a state, you cannot reduce it to the state of a union territory, which is a totally different system of governance. You can make a union territory a state, but I do not think we have the powers under the Constitution, excepting by a radical change under Articles 1 and 3, to reduce a constituent state to the level of being a constituent assembly. Excepting for this gray area, I personally feel that this decision to invoke 370, impose powers, bring it as a part of the nation without any special status, would be the right thing to do in the long term.
All right, so Mr. Kailash Vasudev believes the 377...
That's my view in this whole situation.
Yes, quite clearly put out. I also want to bring in Mr. Manoj Joshi, who's a senior journalist. Mr. Joshi, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Do you agree with Mr. Vasudev's analysis of this current matter? And I also want to be able to answer as many questions as we can. A lot of our viewers are asking, how is this move going to be good for the citizens of Kashmir? How will it bring in peace and prosperity? If you would please answer that question.
Well, you see, I think when it comes to constitutional points, I think you've got three lawyers out there. They will put forward the various constitutional points. The only thing is that in that Article 370, Clause 3, about the Constituent Assembly alone being able to recommend to the President the issue of abrogating Article 370, there are question marks there. Because that there is no Constituent Assembly. Now, one would say that if there is no Constituent Assembly, perhaps the Jammu and Kashmir State Assembly could have done it. But the State Assembly has been suspended. So now what you're seeing really is some kind of subterfuge, in the sense we are bending the constitutional position here, not quite addressing some of the key issues relating to Article 370. The second part is, of course, as I said, you have your constitutional lawyers there, the lawyers there who will respond to the constitutional issues. My point is there are two aspects to this. One is the constitutional aspect and the other is the political aspect. And so you asked me about the second part, meaning what will be the political consequences of this? Now, we all know that through constitutional orders passed by the President over the years, Article 370 had lost all its relevance. It had been completely neutered. But it was a very important symbol. And in some cases, symbols also gain substance. And in the case of Article 370, though it was completely hollow, in my view, it did represent for the Kashmiri people some kind of a symbol of their uniqueness. And now that has also been taken away. Now you may say, well, why should the Kashmiris get any kind of a symbol of uniqueness? But then all you have to do is to look at history and you'll realize why Kashmir is unique. We've spoken about the national aspects of it. Don't forget, not a single country in the world recognizes Kashmir to be an integral part of India. They all say it's a disputed territory whose final status has to be resolved, and resolved through dialogue between India and Pakistan. So Kashmir is unique, and this Article 370 represented that uniqueness. So now, for me, as I said, the article itself is pretty hollow. Most of the powers had been taken away. The unique powers had been taken away. In any case, the center, since 1990s, the center has been the dominant force there. So whether it's a union territory or a state, the center has been the dominant political authority in the state. But what this measure will do is to administer a psychological shock in Kashmir, in the Kashmir Valley. What will be the consequences of this shock? It becomes very difficult to hazard a guess, but I would suspect that at least in the short term, where there was 60, 70% alienation, you might soon get 100% alienation. And that is extremely worrisome because though Pakistan is no longer able to interfere in the affairs of the state to the extent it was in the 1990s, you have a radicalization which since 2014 has been largely domestic. So we can see a period of unrest, alienation. Consequences could be there with the Jammu and Kashmir police. For example, right now the police takes the leading part in the counter-terrorist, counter-militancy efforts. If that police also gets alienated, so we are really going to go back to square one, which obtained in the early 90s.
So okay, so that's interesting, and I just the most common question everyone's asking me this evening is what is going to be the fate of the people who are living in Kashmir at this moment? Will they benefit from the removal of 370, or are they going to suffer because of it? And we're going to try and answer that question. Rakesh Trivedi, senior advocate, joins us right now. Mr. Trivedi, Mr. Kailash Vasudev pointed out a very interesting thing. He said the splitting of a state into two union territories perhaps doesn't have any sort of, there's no precedent to that. Do you think that that perhaps was outside of the purview of the central government?
So let me first say that the steps taken by the government to scrap 35A is a very significant historic step. As so far as Article 370 is concerned, I think the government has not scrapped it but utilized it for applying all the provisions of the Constitution to Jammu and Kashmir, and it has also superseded the 1954 presidential order, which results in the scrapping of Article 35A because it was introduced into the for Jammu and Kashmir by the 1954 order. So far as the presidential order is concerned, it is utilizing Article 370 rather than scrapping it. What the bill is going to do, which is placed in the parliament, I do not know, because scrapping of Article 370 would require a constitutional amendment under Article 368. So far, I don't think that the government has tabled any constitutional amendment in the parliament. So 35A is rightly repealed. It takes away the fundamental rights of the citizens and people of the rest of the India, that is, who are not state subjects of Jammu and Kashmir. And it really is a hindrance in the full integration of Jammu and Kashmir with India. So this step of repealing and scrapping 35A actually fully integrates Jammu and Kashmir. It is a process which began in 1954 when Government of India had departed from the instrument of accession and had applied large number of provisions of the Constitution, almost 260 articles, to Jammu and Kashmir. And as we have seen, as we marched forward, the Prime Minister was converted into Chief Minister and the Sadar-e-Riyasat was converted into Governor. Perhaps that was the time when 35A should have been repealed. But the government, then governments had different approach, and they were talking to different kind of elements in Kashmir who were like Hurriyat, etc., who were hobnobbing with Pakistan also. And so they thought that they could resolve terrorism by that methodology. The present government has broken with the past, and with some out-of-box thinking, they have, as per their manifesto, completely demolished 35A. So that's a great step. And as far as breaking Jammu and Kashmir state into two union territories is concerned, I do not think it is a problem. It doesn't create any constitutional problem, in my opinion, for the simple reason that under Article 1, Jammu Kashmir is a state, and any state, in case of special exigencies or circumstances, can be temporarily, at least, converted into union territories, as we all have been noticing that Jammu Kashmir is contiguous, has borders with China, Pakistan, Afghanistan. So, and we are also witnessing the withdrawal of USA from Afghanistan. So a very different kind of situation has arisen. And therefore, it is absolutely essential for the integrity of India that this kind of a step be implemented. And under Article 370 also, the provisions of the Constitution can be applied to Jammu and Kashmir with exceptions and modifications. So therefore, various provisions of the Constitution can be applied to Jammu Kashmir with modifications and exceptions, and this can also be part of that exercise.
For interrupting you, but the Prime Minister has just tweeted a comment. This is the first comment coming in since this announcement was made. He says, Home Minister Amit Shahji's speech in Rajya Sabha was extensive and insightful. It accurately highlighted the monumental injustices of the past and coherently presented our vision for the sisters and brothers of Jammu and Kashmir. Do hear. So that was a message coming in from the Prime Minister. We'll also bring in Aishwarya Bhati, who's also a senior advocate. Ms. Bhati, good evening. I have a question for you from one of our viewers who wants to know, if we want to truly integrate Jammu and Kashmir into the rest of India, shouldn't the Armed Forces Special Powers Act also be removed in order for people to truly be equal? Your response to that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Faye. Army has no role to play in the maintenance of internal law and order situations inside the country. The job of the army is on the borders. But unfortunately, so far in J&K, we have been dealing with a proxy war. The situation, see, Armed Forces Special Powers Act is not, it's not applied automatically, on no reason at all. The civilian government comes to a finding that the law and order situation cannot be handled by the police, and therefore the army is brought in. And whenever you have the army operating in particular areas, you have to give army those powers to operate in those areas, because the working of the army is different. So I'm certain and I'm hopeful that, now with integration of Jammu and Kashmir, with having the same law, the same economic strength, the same powers, same social justice systems, same gender justice system, I'm sure, and same political, voting rights to people who were there. There were very, very peculiar situations we all know were existing in J&K. So with all that, now more normalcy coming, the army will go, and once there'll be no Special Powers Act, certainly.
Well, I want to open this up to the whole panel right now, and we have a couple of questions that are coming in. One of it, and you did say, Mr. Dwivedi said that the government used innovative means to achieve what they had written out in their manifesto. And they have used an interesting route here and interesting loopholes. But I want to ask you also about the clampdown and the manner in which that was done. All communication shut down in Kashmir. Even now, the landlines are not working. Cable television is not working. So they don't have access to television. They don't have access to internet. They don't have access to cell phone connectivity or landline connectivity. Unless you have a satellite phone, you cannot be in touch. You can't be communicated with in Kashmir, even at this point. Also, former chief ministers being put under house arrest. Was this the right way to do it? And that brings us to the next question, that if this was so good for the people of Kashmir, why did it have to be done in this manner? And anyone who wants to answer that question, Mr. Joshi, if you want to answer that question, and then I'll take it to the rest of the panel.
Well, I'll say a simple point. In any democratic polity, the basic principle is that of due process. If you are caught for murder, you get a fair trial. You get a trial. There's a trial process. Likewise, you want to change things. You want to abrogate Article 370. You want to divide the state in two. Use due process. why use the kind of tactics that were used? And here we were given this completely bogus story that there was a threat to the Amarnath Yatra. They found one rifle and one landmine, and they claimed that there was a huge threat to the Amarnath Yatra. Now it sounded so lame at the time. I was away from the country, so I didn't respond either in my writing or through TV. But the fact of the matter is that due process has not been observed here. I mean, you've got to go through a certain way, and in any democratic system, the basic point is there must be some form of consent of the governed. Meaning the people who are being governed, they must express their consent in some form. Now here you have suspended the assembly. In a democratic system, the parliament and the assembly, parliament at the national level, the assembly at the state level, are the means through which the people's consent is put forward. A people's consent is legitimized. So here you have completely eliminated all that. So it's Mr. Shah, Mr. Modi, they decide what's right. Meaning, I think there's a problem there.
Mr. Vasudev, and I also want you to talk about the, the house arrest on former chief ministers Mehbooba Mufti and Omar Abdullah, whom what we understand still haven't been, that house arrest has not been lifted. Is that democratic, or is that due process?
At this point of time, with the step which the government has taken, it has been a very strong measure which has been enforced upon a people for the purpose of integrating the nation. In this, they have taken the actions which you inform us about: the arrest, house arrest of people, the cutting off of connectivity, not having them accessible on the phones and the like. But isn't that at times a necessary event which takes place in moments of this kind? Please understand, Jammu and Kashmir for the past 70 years have been boiling.
1 second.
There has
Mr.
hardly
Vasudev,
been a year in
Mr.
which you
Vasudev,
haven't
forgive
heard
me.
of violence
I have
or
to stop you for a
disagreements
second.
like.
I'm just bringing breaking news to our audience at this point. Both Omar Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti have been moved from their houses to preventive detention. This is information that we're getting right now, signed by the Executive Magistrate, First Class Srinagar, copy to the District Magistrate. We understand that, and this is in my hand, I'm holding the letter that has been given to Mehbooba Mufti. So our viewers will remember that she has been in, she's been in house arrest since last night, and that has just changed, and she has, it says, whereas the situation has arisen in Kashmir, that appears to me that there are most likely strong apprehensions to law and order situation and breach of peace and tranquility, whereas your activities are also likely to cause a breach of peace, into the consideration of your recent activities that may likely lead to serious law and order situation. Whereas it's also appeared to me that you and a number of your activists and persons associated with you are about to meet and proceed in a procession. Whereas, keeping in consideration the present situation in Kashmir, strong apprehensions of breach of peace and tranquility, I, as Executive Magistrate, do hereby order your detention for preventing of law and order situation. As a preventive measure, we are shifting you to Hari Nivas until further orders. So, I suppose changes the question a little bit, because from what we understand now, both Omar Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti have been moved at this time from their homes into preventive custody, into what appears to be a government guest house, the Hari Nivas guest house, until further orders. So they have now been taken into custody, Mr. Vasudev. Do you want to change your answer? You still believe that this was a necessary measure?
This does raise questions. In a system where rights have not been suspended, you see, it is one thing to integrate a state and take away 370 powers. It is another thing to deny the people the rights under 19. Article 19 now extends to Jammu and Kashmir, so you have a fundamental right. Can you suspend that is the question? My answer is no, you can't. The arrest of people who may have an opposition to this is not democratic and should not be done, because they have their views. They have their views against what is happening because they are residents of that area and they are bound to be disturbed by it. But arrest, detention, taking into custody, muffling public speech, no, I don't think that is correct. In my view, it should not be done.
It should not be done. I want to open this up to the rest of the panel as well. Mr. Dwivedi, do you agree that this is not, this is undemocratic to basically take someone who might disagree with you into preventive custody? Or do you believe that this is warranted, and given the size of the decision that has been made, these precautions are necessary?
I differ with my esteemed colleague and good friend Mr. Vasudev and Mr. Joshi. Preventive detention is sanctioned by Article 22 of the Constitution of India, and it operates in the normal time also.
Agreed.
Except that people who are detained can question their detention on the ground that their fundamental rights are violated. So they are free to question it. But preventive detention is sanctified by Constitution, permitted by the laws which are operating, and in the circumstances that are prevailing and given the magnitude of the steps which have been taken by the government, they are absolutely essential. Let us not allow ourselves to get boggled down. You want great steps to be taken, big steps to be taken. You want integration of Jammu and Kashmir with India. You know the situation prevailing in Jammu and Kashmir. You know the designs of these people. Mehbooba Mufti had said that if 35A is touched, then you are touching barood. Ye barood ko chhone ke saman. So now, if these people with this attitude and they are instigating people, you have to detain them. I think it is a very wise step. And Mr. Amit Shah must be congratulated for taking all these steps in advance, removing the people, Amarnath Yatris, etc. We don't want a massacre to happen there, riots to happen there in Kashmir. So it's a very wise step which they have taken. But in order to implement these drastic steps taken by the government, important steps taken by the government, it is absolutely essential.
Agarwal of the BJP joining us right now. Mr. Agarwal, good evening. Yes, I'm coming straight to you. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We've had, you've missed most of the discussion, unfortunately. We talked about the benefit and this will bring to the Kashmiri people. I want to understand from you as well. And I also want to understand what the justification is right now for placing Mehbooba Mufti and Omar Abdullah under preventive custody.
One thing I would like to tell is that our analysis said very clearly that majority of people in Kashmir and outside the Kashmir in India now wanted 370 and 35A to go. There was a very limited, minuscule population which had vested interest and of leadership. Those were working for this using 370 as a separatist instrument and benefiting out of that whole issue and exploiting it. That had to be corrected. Second point was, we had very clearly mentioned in our manifesto that 370 and 35A had to go. Only the timing was not very clear. The timing, anybody can say that you did not mention, but this was very clear that we are going to remove it. Mr. Shah, at every point of time, the current Home Minister had said, and every public platform and in any discussion, that this has to go, we will remove it. Timing was there, not in public domain. The third thing I would like to mention is that I would categorically say that this is the most well-planned and well-executed till time the decision which had a very high repercussion, which had a potential of higher repercussion, because there was a narration for 70 years building in the country, and that narration was being built by some of the people which were very high ups in the hierarchy, and their vested interest and even the cross-border activities and Pakistan involvement, terrorist activity, NIA reports, all these showed that a very well-planned, well-executed preventive measure had to be taken. That was done here. And I would also like that the constitutionality of the whole decision has been mentioned by the Home Minister in the floor of the Parliament, that this decision will approve the test of the legality. And finally, I would like to mention is those who are crying foul on the legality and other things, They never talked how 35A was surreptitiously incorporated into the legality without proper legal process being followed. How this Mr. Home Minister said in the Parliament how Governor General was placed into the country, first Governor General, without even going through Constituent Assembly and other things. So just to keep in good faith what Mr. Nehru, first Prime Minister, thought. So the consensus was built. We have been, there had been laws, and those who are talking that there was no consensus, I tell you 70 years we have discussed threadbare on this issue, and that narration has not helped integration of the Kashmir, and we have done everything for economic development, growth, infrastructure. 90,000 crores was provided in the few months back for development of infrastructure in Kashmir. People of Kashmir want in economic development, growth, integration,
Agarwal, can you hear
and employment, all these benefits which are being received. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Agarwal, I just want to point out a couple of things that you said. You said in the very beginning that you knew that a majority of the people in Kashmir wanted 370 to be removed. If that is true, then why are there such heavy preventive measures? Why was it done in this manner? If people were going to be happy about it, then why did it have to be brought in this manner? That's my first question. My second question is, you did say, of course, that this will help development. We've done a lot for development, but the development has not reached Kashmir. Isn't that not true then also for Bihar, where children are dying for lack of hospitals, for Orissa, where there is a poor rate of malnourishment among children, for any other state where we can pick areas where development has not reached, where health has not reached, where education has not reached? So, will that be the government's then route to solve the problem? The question is not over. Will that be the government's route to then solve the problem of the lack of development and discipline across the country?
I have said that only 370 is the cause of underdevelopment of particular area. There can be other areas. I am telling you 370 was one of the cause of alienation of Kashmir. For 70 years we have lost. I am not saying that there was no development in Jammu and Kashmir, but it has lost many of the integration process and benefits that could have been their just and their rightful share. The second thing I would like to tell you, that when I am telling you that majority wanted this 370 and 35A to go, I would tell you that for 70 years we have tried the other narrative. Has it helped 370 and 35A, helped the integration of the Kashmir? When that has failed, so what is the harm in trying for other things? And for which we have clearly, transparently said in our manifesto, we have discussed at many platforms. And this vested interest people, I tell you so many examples, why we have lost 41,000 people in Kashmir over last 70 years. Mr. Amit Shah has mentioned in the parliament. Why lot of money, why anti-corruption and anti-investigation investigation agencies not allowed to check these the benefits being not getting into the concentrated, getting into few hands and not going to the public. Why their own people, of those who are called the well-wishers of the Kashmiri people, their own family members are not staying in Kashmir and studying in foreign countries? Why how money is flowing, the level of lavish living that they are having,
no,
where
Mr.
they are getting money?
Mr. Agarwal, I do believe,
investigation,
okay, all right.
Foreign money coming to this
okay, so
issue.
sending children overseas is a problem.
That 370 had to go. 370 was...
Sending children overseas for studies is a problem?
370 was the cause of many of the problems that
That's why they were sending their children overseas to study. You're connecting things that are not connected, Mr. Agarwal.
One thing is not the problem. Then? But why why few families are getting all the benefits that are being received by the Jammu and Kashmir?
Mr. Agarwal, you know what? The dynastic politics is a plague in every state of our country. And also, I can point out several members of the BJP who have their
Yes.
children in the party.
And it's in the
The
plate
Shiv
in the
Sena, for
Jammu and
example, which is
Kashmir
your
also.
ally, is run by a family. Several of your allies is also
So
run by
democracy
families.
was not having its say in Jammu and Kashmir. Democracy was not having say. Democracy was not having its say in Jammu and Kashmir.
Okay, all right.
Democratic process was being hindered by 370. The terrorist activity.
All right, so I just, we've lost the connection with Mr. Agarwal, but I just want to point out that a maximum number of our panelists believe that removing 370 was important, it was necessary, and it needed to be done. And in the long run, it will be beneficial not just for Kashmir, but for all of India. It will strengthen our position on the global scale. This is a consensus that has come from our panel this evening. There have been, like Mr. Karashwas, they've raised his eyebrow about a couple of things. The grey area about turning a state into a union territory and whether there is a provision for that in the constitution. And secondly, placing Mehbooba Mufti and Omar Abdullah from house arrest into now preventive custody. But like I said, there are two separate portions of this story. One is the actual decision, which there seems to be mostly a majority understanding that this was a good thing. And secondly, the manner in which it was done. A lot of the people now feel that this was necessary in order to simply get it done. In fact, I want to point out to our audience that connectivity with Kashmir, or with the valley at least in Srinagar, is still down. We're not able to reach our colleagues on the internet. There's no WhatsApp, there's no cell phones, landlines, and they have no access to cable television. So at about 5 o'clock this evening, my colleague sent in this, Sohail sent in this update on what the status was in Kashmir. This was, I believe, the last update we received from Srinagar. We're just going to listen in.
As central government has brought the proposal of revoking Article 370 from Jammu and Kashmir, we are reporting from the Secretariat in Kashmir. You can see the state flag is standing tall with the Indian flag at the top of the Secretariat in Srinagar city. In Srinagar, there is deployment of the security forces to ensure that the law and order doesn't go out of control. More and more security personnel have been inducted in Srinagar city to ensure that no protest takes place after the revocation of Article 370. Meanwhile, the other districts of Jammu region are also tense and security forces have been deployed there also. In Jammu city, people are celebrating the revocation of Article 370, but in Srinagar, the communication is out of gear. There is no one to tell exactly what is happening. The phones are not working, mobile internet services is everything out of service, and now we will have to wait as and when all the services are restored.
That was Sohail. Moving on, I did have a conversation with Mr. Yashwant Sinha, former Finance Minister and former External Affairs Minister, both on the matter of Kashmir and the matter of our economy. Take a look. There are two parts to today's decision. One is the merit of the decision itself. The other is the manner in which the decision has been brought about. And I want to go through this one by one. I want you to first tell us what you believe as a manner in which this decision was brought about. Do you believe it was constitutional? Several members of the opposition say that the Constitution and Parliament were completely ignored and insulted. Do you agree with them?
I would tend to agree with that view, because the manner in which the legislation has been brought, you are aware that it was suddenly sprung upon Rajya Sabha at 11 o'clock in the morning, and then discussion was started on a very momentous piece of legislation, which is not merely relating to the status of Jammu and Kashmir as it existed. It has existed in the last 70 years, but also it destroyed the state as we know it. It has dismembered the state, and the state has not only vanished, but it has been reduced in status to that of an union territory. Jammu and Kashmir minus Ladakh is UT, as you said, with legislature. Ladakh is union territory without legislature. So, which means what? It means that we don't know yet what the the division of responsibilities be between the Lieutenant Governor and the elected legislature in Jammu and Kashmir. But whatever it may be, we know from experience what is happening in Delhi. We know from experience what's happening in Puducherry between the Lieutenant Governor and the elected Chief Minister. So whatever steps the Government of India has taken and is getting through in Rajya Sabha, it will get through in Parliament, is quite clearly fraught with all kinds of dangers for the future. This is one point. So the method is questionable, it is dubious, and it should be challenged. Somebody, I'm sure, is going to challenge it in a Supreme Court, which was already seized of some of the issues. And then let's see what the judiciary pronounces on these issues. But as far as I am concerned, I think the method adopted is very, very dubious.
Mr. Sinha, you also just said that it's destroyed the state as we know it, it's reduced it to a union territory, and it's fraught with danger. So if we actually examine the decision itself of removing 370, now removing Article 370 has been in the manifesto of the BJP, has been an aim of the BJP for many decades, including for when you were part of the party yourself. Do you believe that it is a good decision and it will lead to lower violence and better development in the state?
That's what the government claims. But, you know, the reality has been brought out starkly by the events of today. The valley of Kashmir is under a clampdown. It appears as if there is a martial law in the valley. And the step by the government is being celebrated in the rest of the country. Now, this brings out the very sharp divide that exists with regard to the feelings with respect to Article 370 in parts of India and in Jammu and Kashmir, especially the Valley of Kashmir.
Well, Mr. Sinha, from an external affairs point of view, if you were to examine the various things that have happened over the last couple of months, including Mr. Trump making two mentions of the possibility of him intervening, his plan of moving out of Afghanistan, his meetings with Imran Khan in Washington, would you say that this move right now strengthens our position on Kashmir in relations to America and Pakistan at this point?
No, it weakens it.
How so?
It weakens it because 3-4 things have happened. You are aware of what the Secretary General of the UN said about the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. We have criticized him, but he has stated what he thinks is his view. Then we are aware of the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, its approach to the human rights violations by the government of India in Kashmir. Then we come to Trump. Now, I don't believe the Prime Minister would have told Trump to mediate. No Indian Prime Minister would say that. But at the same time, by repeating that offer, Trump, it appears, is willing to jump into this issue and is willing to mediate between Pakistan and India. And what is more important is the fact that Pakistan is not going to take it lying down. It will, I'm sure it will knock at every door at the UN. And the Jammu and Kashmir issue, perhaps, will therefore not remain a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. The danger is it might be internationalized. And I'll not be surprised at all, given the character that Trump has displayed in the White House, if he says US will intervene and mediate between India and Pakistan. And if you say no, then you are on the wrong side of the Americans and the United Nations.
Mr. Sinha, also we've had the Home Minister speak in Rajya Sabha and in Lok Sabha. He's talked about how several of the wrongdoings that have taken place, or the lack of development, the murders that have happened, the lack of education, the lack of infrastructure, several of these things he's attributed to Article 317. He said all of that will change right now. It is really largely the political families of Jammu and Kashmir that have held the people back. Now, the relationship with the local people of Kashmir has always also been a delicate relationship that India has had to manage. Do you believe that the activity of the last 48 hours has perhaps endangered that delicate relationship?
Yes, I do. Otherwise, we would not have seen the unprecedented clampdown that we are seeing both in the valley as well as in Jammu. It's not merely that very large number of security forces are there out in the streets. It's not merely that the streets are deserted. It's not merely that curfew has been imposed, but all means of communication, cell phones, internet, everything has been disconnected. You can't reach the people of Jammu or the people of Kashmir. Why? If it is such a favorable step for them, why haven't we been able to carry conviction with them and tell them that it is in their interest? I believe that we have used a taupe to swat a fly. I mean, which part of India is a developed part of India? Isn't there poverty, deprivation, suffering in Jharkhand, in parts of Orissa, in parts of Madhya Pradesh, in parts of UP, in parts of other parts of the country? So to say that Article 370 and 35A were responsible for the non-development of Jammu and Kashmir is something which I'll find laughable. And that their removal is going to bring heaven to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. If it is so, then why hasn't the government carried conviction with the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and why aren't they celebrating and beating the drum in the streets of Srinagar?
Mr. Sinha, the opposition here, whether it be the local, the regional parties in Kashmir, that the leaders of whom were placed on house arrest, or the parties in the parliament, found themselves largely unable to do anything. Do you believe that this was keen political strategy by the government to be able to find that right moment, the right loopholes, given the fact that legally this article cannot be removed without a clearance from the committee in the assembly? But there's no committee in the assembly because there's no state government. As a result, there was an interesting loophole there that the government used to just basically get the president's signature.
Quite right. I mean, the Article 370 itself has a proviso which clearly lays down that it can only be done with the approval of the Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, there is no Constituent Assembly, so at least the Assembly's approval should have been taken. But there is no Assembly either. There is the governor. And who is the governor? The governor is an appointee of the central government, and he represents not the people of Jammu and Kashmir, but represents only the government of India. So how can it be said that he represents the will of the people and his consent or approval is sufficient to meet the constitutional requirement? I think when this matter is agitated before courts of law, then this will be a very important point there, that you cannot ride roughshod over the provisions of our constitution and say the governor will represent the people of that state. And it sets a very dangerous precedent because this is something which can be repeated in any state of India.
Well, from what you understand, the Rajya Sabha has been adjourned for the day and the bill has passed, I think, in Lok Sabha. We'll bring you more updates about that. But Mr. Sinha, when you say that this basically is running roughshod over our constitutional provisions, are you calling this undemocratic?
No, that there are two different things. One is unconstitutionality. Any democratic government has the obligation to abide by the Constitution. The other is the manner in which this whole thing has been carried in the upper house, the Rajya Sabha. And, the majority has been manufactured. We know what is happening to the supreme leader of the BSP. There are so many people who are under investigation by the investigating agencies of the government. And they are clearly surrendering before the might of the government of India.
Well, Mr. Sinha, you mentioned a couple of times that this would probably wind up in court one way or the other. Do you believe that this move by the government would hold in the court of law? Would it survive scrutiny of the court of law?
I personally believe it will not stand judicial scrutiny. And a legal constitutional view will clearly go against the government of India. But more importantly than what the judicial pronouncement ultimately will be is the manner in which the people of Jammu and Kashmir, especially of the valley, have been treated. I mean, we are promising, as I said earlier, the heaven for them. And they are not interested in this kind of heaven.
Mr. Sinha, if I may just change gears for a moment, because while I have the opportunity to speak with you, and I understand if you need to get a glass of water, but I also want to ask you a couple of questions on the economy, because in all of this, the thing that has been ignored completely or has not been answered, questions that haven't been answered, is to do with the economy. The markets are in a continuous tailspin. The Nifty and the Sensex were down even today. The Sensex lost about over 400 points. The Nifty was down about 134 points. Industry leaders, including the chairperson of India's largest bank, SBI, HDFC's chairperson, Deepak Parekh, L&T's AM Nayak, many have actually come forward now to say India is witnessing an unprecedented slowdown. We're losing jobs across several sectors. The auto industry, for example, is in its worst, what they're calling their worst ever slowdown. Do you think the government has perhaps not paid enough attention to this, or have their moves failed?
There is a school of thought, Faye, yes, and I agree with them, which believes that this sudden move on Jammu and Kashmir is been taken in order to divert attention from the economic issues that the country is facing. I mean, for the last 3-4 days, you and everybody else has been talking about nothing but the unprecedented situation in Jammu and Kashmir, and this debate will go on for many more days. In the meanwhile, the economy is going from bad to worse. And you mentioned some of the issues. I believe that it is not only an unprecedented slowdown, it is not that every sector or almost every sector of the economy is in a mess today, but government is telling untruth to the people. Ratin Roy, who is a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, he has pointed out how there is a hole of 1,70,000 crore rupees in the budget on the receipt side, which is bound to reflect on the expenditure side, and the finance minister has gotten away in parliament with blue murder. I mean, every statistics that is meted out by or dished out by this government is lacking, completely lacking in credibility.
Well, Mr. Sinha, if we consider, these points one by one, and it's interesting, and I have heard some rumors, but the truth is, even after the entire Kashmir move comes and goes, the slowdown will not change. And I'm interested right now in what's going on with our economy, in your opinion. Jobs has been a focus for us personally on this channel for over a year. And we perhaps have never seen it go this bad, because the big employers of our country, which is real estate, infrastructure, agriculture, the auto industry, auto ancillary industries, they've all either come to a grinding halt or have slowed down tremendously. The truth is, how much will the rural economy be able to hold before it collapses completely, Mr. Sinha?
I agree with you entirely. And as far as the rural economy is concerned, the monsoons have not been up to the mark in many parts of the country. There is either drought or there are floods, and therefore even rural demand will suffer as a result of this. But for many years now, there has been lack of demand, consumption demand as well as investment demand in our economy. And as a result of that, there is no investment in our economy. As a result of that, NPAs of the banks have accumulated to an extent which has been alarming. All these issues have been there, piling up over the last 5 years. And the government has thought it fit not to deal with them, but only tell the people untruths so that people would be with the government. And that's what happened. Let me also tell you that the only economic issue which has a direct electoral impact is price rise. And there, fortunately, the government has been very lucky, because international crude prices have not gone through the ceiling. They are still moderate, around $60–62, and therefore they have been able to hold the price line. And that is why economic issues could not become issues during the last election. But at the same time, this crisis that we are seeing in our economy, in sectors of the economy, is bound to come to the notice of the people, the common people, and they are bound to suffer if they are not suffering already. It's not merely jobs. I mean, the farmers of this country, they are in a mess. And if they were not in a mess, why would the government think in terms of giving them the Kisan Samman money? So they are using Band-Aid in order to resolve very difficult economic issues. What is even worse is that the global economic situation is not going to help. The global economy is also in a mess, with all kinds of funny decisions being taken by Trump with regard to trade with China, with regard to trade with India and elsewhere. So the global situation is not going to help. The domestic situation is in very poor health, and we can look forward to some very bad times on the economic front.
Mr. Sinha, the government has set itself a target of a $5 trillion economy, and this phrase gets used a lot. And the government seems fairly confident of achieving this target. Do you believe the target is achievable now?
$5 trillion. You go and ask the man in the street, does he understand what a trillion means? And dollars. I mean, does he know very much about dollars? The point is, this government specializes in showing unachievable dreams to the people. And because they have the control of the means of communication, their message goes directly to the people, they are misled. And but this cannot go on forever. 5 trillion economy is neither here nor there. Will 5 trillion economy bring bread to the people, to to the people who are not well off? Will 5 trillion economy get them whatever they want? Employment, houses, electricity?
Mr. Sinha, my last question to you is about what is being called tax extortion or tax terrorism. Post the fairly unfortunate death of VG Siddhartha of Cafe Coffee Day, several people have come forward, including Mr. Mohandas Pai of Infosys, formerly of Infosys, Kiran Majumdar Shaw and several others, talking about the fact that the income tax department is harassing not just not just entrepreneurs, but also people who run businesses. Do you believe that this has gotten worse over the last few years for whatever reason? Or is it because the government is now looking at a zero corruption system that people are feeling the heat?
No, it's nothing to do with corruption or eliminating corruption. You know, this is tax terrorism, pure and simple. When we were in the opposition and the UPA was in power, I remember all of us used to speak about the tax terrorism which was unleashed from time to time by the UPA government. And we promised the people of this country that if the BJP or NDA were to come to power, there will be no tax terrorism. But what we are witnessing today is the worst form of tax terrorism than anything practiced by the UPA. I mean, the income tax department has gone berserk, and they are what shall I say? I mean, they are harassing people. Some of them are speaking out. Many of them are not speaking out for further fear of the income tax department. But it's a very, very serious situation. It is unfortunate that this government does not believe in running the country in cooperation with businesses. It treats business now and business people as enemies and is treating them like one.